Welcome to Working Relationships, a conversation between composer and assistant, where I, your host, Jini Maxwell, am joined by Simon, Hanna and Natalie Jeffreys, who will be talking about their workflow and working relationship as composer and assistant. All right, shall we get started?
Sounds good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe we can start with just the most basic question of all. Who are you? What's your background? What are we doing here?
You go first.
All right, my name's Simon. I write music for games, and is that it?
No, you've got more to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the panel, guys.
Talk about Bactix,
I work on Vactix video games, and
which was nominated.
nominated. It's not going to win, but it was nominated.
I'm going to agree that it probably won't win. Not because it's not great. So he got nominated for an AGDA this year for best score.
No. Excellence in music.
Excellence in music. Sorry. The issue is that he was nominated in the same category as Stray Gods.
I found out I was nominated. I was like, yes. I was like, who else? Then I was like, wait, Stray Gods.
That is not.
I was like, no. That was too late, surely. And then
Not a comment on you at all. Like,
and I was like, Stray Gods. I was like, well,
it's just like, Stray Gods just kind of invented a whole new genre. So, sorry, continue. But you got nominated.
Yeah.
That was what I wanted you to say.
It was like incredible to be up against, the two other. That's Dan Golding, right? Dan Golding.
Yeah, for Frog Detective.
And like to just be amongst those ranks is a win already. So, Cool. And what else do I do? Yeah, that's it.
I think it's a great list.
Cool. Yeah.
Pretty impressive. I'm Natalie. I'm also a composer, but the past kind of year or so now, I've been doing a lot of assisting for composers. First, Simon was the first composer I assisted for, and then for most of this year, I've been assisting Kevin Penkin. If you know Kevin Penkin, who did Florence, Necrobarista in the games world, and a whole bunch of anime. Just a whole bunch of it. So, yeah.
2 winners, I reckon. Pretty good run so far. Did you meet through working as a composer and assistant, you two?
So I had heard his name a few times because my husband was friends with him. And so I knew of like the ethereal Simon.
The concept.
Yeah. And we were members of the same online forum. It's called Perspective. It's open for a whole bunch of film and game composers worldwide. It's very big. I don't know if I recommend joining it unless you feel like Hans Zimmer kind of taking you down for no particular reason. Anyway, so that's where Simon posted on it.
I did.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Simon posted on it saying he was after a composer's assistant, and I've been wanting to get into the field for a while, but it's kind of hard in Australia. There's not as much demand, and so that's,
Yeah, if you ever need like an assistant or something, don't just like do an open call, because you're going to need an assistant to help you go through your emails.
Worked.
Well, I actually did. I kind of am interested in asking this question from both sides. How was the process of like finding the right assistant for you?
Yeah.
Terrible. And it went so badly.
Oh, no. It's like
This is
I encourage people to, where possible, get into that position, because it'll give you a completely different perspective on, the hiring process, not just like as an assistant, but even just like as a composer. Like you are asked to judge people off of like the most minuscule information you get, and you start to really like small details. Like I was in preparation for this talk, I had a chat with a colleague who, his name's Alex, he works at Riot, and I wanted to get his perspective, just like so that I wasn't, completely subjectively, or like, just to give me a bit of a feel for like how it is elsewhere. And he said that they are basically looking for like any reason to eliminate you as a candidate, because you just get flooded and you don't have time to go through it. You're already, especially as like in an assistant role. So you have to judge people on, and I felt awful. I hated it, like, because I was like, all of these people I'm sure are like fine, like could work well, and it started to get a little bit upsetting that I had to just be like, no, like for whatever reason.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Yeah, like, cause you know, so you should think about like the way you present yourself, because any small detail can, even things like, for me it's like a photo. If I can't find a photo of you, I'm like, you could be an otter who's worked out a computer, like I don't know.
That sounds ideal. I'd love to hire an otter as an assistant.
But yeah, if you can ever get into that position where you need to hire someone, you'll like, for whatever reason, you know, things can just not happen for you. You know, you might not get selected, and you might be like, oh, it's because I'm no good, and like, you know, they just didn't like my, you know, my work or whatever. But there can be so many reasons.
Well, I think that's a really interesting and like practical piece of advice. Have a photo either in your application or somewhere online. What were some other things that maybe have less to do with the content of the application and more in its presentation that did kind of, I suppose, filter people out? Yeah,
so I knew for this role, I knew that we were going to be reaching out to a lot of like instrumentalists and things like that. And so the prospective candidate needed to like present themselves well because they were going to be doing it on behalf of me. And so like, if you're like sending emails that are, and this is lame, like it's stupid, like you know, when we would talk once we started working together, you know, I'd send emails, I'd be like, or messages, I'd be like, hey, fuck, like, what is this? Like, you know, like no grammar. But like, when you're first like introducing yourself, I think it's good to still keep things at a professional level, probably more professional than they'll ever be going forward, because it means that I'll know that, you know, if you're talking on behalf of me or the company or whatever, that you're doing so in a professional manner. So grammar and just sentence structure, which is so lame, but and then just like addressing like everything that was asked for in terms of like, you know, examples and samples, and the fewer questions I had about the prospective candidate once I'd gone through it, the better, because it meant that, you know, if there was just too many unanswered questions, I'm out of time. Like, I need to move on.
I do remember being really formal and professional at the start, because it was a similar process to just applying for any job. Yeah. I do remember being really formal in my emails, very professional. And then when we had to have the first chat, you were like, hey, how you doing? Like, hey. Yeah, we're thinking of starting like next week. Like it's just like the difference between the recruiting process and the actual work. It's just, like, I wish it could be different, but it's pretty, like, it's...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, and, yeah, look, it might be different for others. It's just specifically that I knew that... It's just specifically that I knew that we were going to be, you know, talking to instrumentalists
It might be
and
me.
stuff. Yeah, but what else, aside from the presentation? I think, like, and then, you know, obviously content, you know, is important too, very important. Yep. But yeah, I think that's.
So, how did you make your application stand out, Natalie? How'd you cut through?
So, I guess I have a couple of pieces of advice. One is, funnily, it's kind of like applying for an assistant job. You're trying to pick the best tip from applying for composer jobs, and you're trying to pick the best tip from applying for general work, because it's kind of how they converge. So I guess the tip that has stuck with me the most from these previous high scores that I've been to, just in terms of pitching yourself as composer, is to figure out what your niche is. It doesn't need to be like super obscure or anything but like that, but like people tend to respond better when you are kind of a specialist at something. Like for me, for a little while there, I was saying, before I started assisting, I was saying, you know, I do female-led stories, because basically everything I'd scored had a woman as the lead, and I realised there's probably something I'm resonating with here. So if, like, let's say Simon said there's going to be a lot of communication with musicians and outside parties and scoring stages, talk about what your niche is within that realm. Like, you know, I've done a lot of customer service. This is something I'm really passionate about. I always make sure, like, be really particular. Like, I guess what I would probably say is I try and find that balance between professional and, the first word that came to mind is cozy, but that's not the word I mean. Warm, there we go, warm. So I guess try and say something unique, but that still pinpoints the middle of what they've specifically asked for. And in terms of just generally applying for jobs, it's kind of similar, to be honest, be succinct. No one wants to read like 3 pages. Nobody, like, even if they ask for it, they're probably not going to, which sucks. That's not your fault, but be really succinct, pick the like most direct way to answer their questions so that when they're scrolling through, they're like, yes, this person has what I want. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay, good.
I actually kind of delving into that a little bit more, specifically the assistant composer role, and the fact that it sort of blends skills between maybe a general administrative job and a composition role. Imagining that there are a few either working or aspiring assistant composers in the room right now, what are some of the non-technical skills do you think that are useful in this role? That's one for both of you.
So what I'll say...
I think, like, the idea of, you know, being able to communicate professionally with external parties.
Yeah, absolutely.
Classic example.
Yeah, I will say that the difference between assisting Simon and assisting Kevin has been really big, like very different work that I've done. I did do some of the same stuff, but like the work I've done for Kevin, I almost can't think of something that is non-technical. It basically was all MIDI transcription, orchestration, a little bit of score prep, that kind of thing. I can't actually think, apart from communicating with Kevin, like just a normal person, you know, it basically, what I'd say is that I use my musical theory skills more in assisting than I do in composing. However, with Simon, we only got the chance to do a little bit of that. And the rest of it was, a lot of it was reaching out to musicians and that kind of thing. I don't think this is standard, but there were times where we had to kind of re-pitch to the game devs about like what we'd be accomplishing for them, and so I would kind of gather some of the stats and what we'd be doing. I wouldn't say that that's an average assistant job to have, though. What were you going to say?
Oh,
it looks like you were ready to jump in. Sorry.
Geez.
No, you don't have to.
What was the question again, though? Sorry.
Non-technical skills.
Non-technical, obviously the communicating is not just with like outside parties, but potentially like my boss or my boss's boss as well, I think. So, you know, so that's a big one. Like you can't have someone...
Oh, there's also just like general organized. One of the big tasks was basically file. Like it sounds so boring, but it's not as boring as it sounds.
It's boring.
Simon has an absolute monster amount of digital samples, and honestly, they were chaos. like I'm not much different, but they were chaos. And so a lot of what I was doing was trying to figure out naming conventions, and that would be really easy for it. I think one of the things to keep in mind if you want to be an assistant is you have to figure out the composer you're working for, what their brain specifically is like. You shouldn't rely on the same thing for every composer you work for, because their brains are different. And so it was about kind of chatting with Simon, like, you know, if I write orchestral strings, is that going to actually click something for you? Or if I write world strings, is that going to click for you? And he'll be like, oh no, I'll need plucking, I'll need bowing, you know. So a whole lot of communication. It's basically, like, I know we've said that over and over, but yeah, a whole lot of communication skills. And if you
outside
don't
of
have
technical.
those, that's okay. You can find people to help you out. Like, I don't want anybody here who's socially anxious like me to be like, okay, well, I can't do this job then. That we're all socially anxious. That's the good thing about the games industry. We're all in the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd like to dive into that kind of like daily dynamic and daily routine between you two while you were working together, to kind of talk a bit about what that specific working relationship looked like.
Yeah, it's always, if we've got obviously a longer task to be completed, then it would just, I'd just touch base, and that, that's probably another thing, is being able to work autonomously and not needing much oversight, because that would sort of defeat the purpose of, having an assistant if you had to be on them like constantly. And so, we usually would just like touch base maybe once or twice, unless like something big was coming up. But, it's generally like we walk through like the basics of it, and then it would just be a matter of like, this is the chunk we're taking care of now, and then, we need to do this, or we need to drop this, and, we need to get this score prepped so we can get the instrumentalist recorded and things like that. It was pretty, like, once you had the basics down of how it was all going to work, it was really just a...
Yeah. It was kind of... I'm going to keep bringing up my work with Kevin more because I think it's probably a truer representation of what being an assistant is.
I actually wonder, sorry to interrupt, but why not have both? Can we talk about your work with Simon and then also talk about your work with Kevin? Because I imagine there's quite a range.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was going to... With Simon, it resembled a regular office job a lot of the time. Not in the content, but because we worked for a company and this was a live service game, this was an ongoing gig. We don't work there anymore, but hypothetically it was an ongoing gig. So the management day-to-day is really different than if you were to have like a one-off gig, and like Simon was saying, we would touch base every day being like, is there a deadline coming up? Because you will kick into, what's the word? Thank you, deadline mode.
Thank you,
we
Mina.
have a term that we use. You can kick into deadline mode in terms of transcribing and orchestrating and that kind of thing, but it's unique in the sense that there are going to be quiet periods, which is not the case with a regular gig. There are going to be quiet periods where he'll be like, we're waiting for the devs to get back to us. Do you reckon you can find something to do in file organization? Do you reckon you can, I don't know, just... one of the cooler things I did, is researching musicians, trying to find musicians for more world instruments. Like there was this big list of things, of instruments Simon wanted to try and use. And so if we had those empty moments, in the mornings he would be like, okay, we don't have pressing deadlines, but this is what I want you to kind of look into the most today. That was it. That's what I mean. It kind of resembled like an office job a lot. Yeah.
So working in a sort of live service environment sounds really different to what you're doing now as an assistant composer.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of said what I was going to say about Kevin is that all the gigs I've done with him have been one-off gigs. And there is never a dull moment. There is never empty space. But that was really unique to the job with Simon, that there was actually empty space, which I think all composers should have, a little bit of empty space, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Every person in every job. This is a big thing for me. You should be able to have kind of an off week and not ruin your life about it. It's shockingly rare.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions from the audience here. Some really good ones, actually.
Oh, jeez.
One from Kevin Wan, who asks, what kind of tasks are you looking to pass down to your assistant as a composer?
I mean, this will vary from composer to composer, but the assistant role, it can be a pretty tough gig because depending on, what Nat was covering was basically like everything, like potentially, like, MIDI, orchestration, score prep, and these are like, you can get exploited if you're not careful with how you're, treated as an assistant. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Sorry, I forgot the question. Jesus.
Just key tasks.
Yeah. So anything that needs to get done. I was very upfront with Nat at the start that I don't like the concept of like ghost writing or anything like that. I find it very unsavory as like a business practice, which is like if Nat wrote music under my name or something, which I don't. And I was upfront in saying that like that's not going to be part of. But there was going to be potential for like additional composing. So it could be anything from file management to organising, score prep sessions, orchestrating. Yeah, just anything that you can think of in the process. Someone is probably out there needing help with it, which is a really, really interesting thing to think about if you're trying to get into, the world of composing. Is that the more skills that you have, the more you can like offer someone. Even if it's like integration like Wise or Fmod or something like that, like, you could start a relationship just helping with that, and that could flourish. That's how careers are made, by starting with small tasks, I think, if you don't, land a massive game straight away.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You just touched on the subject of exploitation, and that's something I'd really like to talk a little bit more about. What do you think are some red flags to look out for when you see maybe an assistant composer role advertised? Or apart from general, like looking for a rock star, or a family hero. And also, what are some tasks that are not appropriate to give to an assistant composer?
Cleaning walls and things like that.
Now you say that. That's a really good question. I've been very lucky to always assist for very kind of accommodating and understanding composers. However, I know that's definitely not always the case. I think part of the issue with exploitation in this industry is that, particularly in America, we don't really have much of an ecosystem for assistants here, but in America, exploitation is the standard. Like overworking, a lot of ghostwriting. You might get a credit. Not many people would know about it. So I think the reason I'm struggling to answer the question is because a lot of advertisements are, in essence, kind of exploiting because it's become the standard. How do I put a positive spin on this? I guess, so something that you can expect but also put your foot down. Now, let's say this, there are things you're going to definitely encounter, and you can choose when to put your foot down, is how many hours you work, pay, depending on where you're at. Actually, with Simon, pay was pretty good, pretty decent.
It's not my money.
Yeah, good job. But it can be minimum wage most of the time. And if you feel like your skill sets are beyond that, because I remember before I started working, far out, why did that take me so long? Before I started working with Simon, I contacted somebody who'd done assistant work in America, and they did say that if you're starting out fresh, maybe you don't have too many credits, you don't have many qualifications, minimum wage is pretty standard. But if you feel like you're coming in with, like, let's say you've been doing like 10 years of game work, game dev work, and then you come in to be a composer's assistant, you could be like, well, look, I don't think minimum wage is appropriate for me. I'm coming in with a lot of knowledge. I'm coming in with a lot of experience. Obviously, you'd say this all in corporate jargon, but, I guess that's the only piece of advice I have at the moment. You go.
It is really tough because, I could have hired Nat and just been like, keep doing score prep or something like that, to the point where it was no longer an assistant position. It was a really poorly paid, score prep or orchestrator or something like that. So I think, which is weird, because there's no defined line where, you're doing too much of something, or if you're doing too much of something, or, taking on more responsibility than you're kind of getting paid for. So it's a really blurred line. So I think, it's up to every individual person to know when, it's gone over the line.
That's probably how I'd put it as well. Sorry, it's so hard. It's hard to answer that question directly when it's become the standard, because, it's hard to say no. It's hard to say no to job advertisements that do exploit, because you kind of go, well, what other option is there? So I think what Simon said, know your own personal boundaries, is really important. And
just general advice from me, someone who works in the arts, also an industry extremely prone to overwork and undercrediting, is get it in writing when you start a job what the expectations of you are, and then keep track of what you are doing. Literally just keep it written down.
Leave nothing unsaid. Absolutely.
No, that's really good advice. Definitely do that.
Because it's rough out there.
It's rough. Sorry, I felt like a real bummer.
No, it's important to talk about openly, I think. Actually, maybe this question kind of leads on from that quite well. How do you manage quiet periods as an assistant? Are you pitching to other composers, polishing up skills, working a day job?
So I was very lucky, again, very unusual, but very lucky in the work with Simon, because I was put on retainer. So I was getting paid for a certain amount of hours whether I had the work for that many hours or not, which is, do not have your hopes up for that. That is very rare. So I was very lucky for that. So in terms of pitching to other composers, at the time, I didn't really feel like I needed to. I wasn't working full-time hours, but at the time, that was what was working for me. So you absolutely could be pitching for other composers. But for me, the quiet times didn't mean less pay, because I know that a lot of the time, with one-off gigs, that is the case. If you don't have much on, you need to find something quick to get money. It just wasn't the case for me, you go, yeah.
No, I think that broadening your skill set as much as possible, and you don't have to just be assisting, but it can be one part of your overall portfolio. I think it's really important to not limit yourself, and because I think a goal starting out should be to try and sustain your career without having to, go get a day job or whatever. I think that's a fantastic point to make, where you can feel really good, and that can mean some assisting. Maybe you're working on a small game yourself or something like that, and just maybe you're teaching. And so I think.
Actually, I think learning game dev skill, that's a goal for myself. I think that is always, if you have some spare time, it's a really good skill to have, because even when I've seen audio and music positions advertised, sometimes they'll say knowledge of this program would be a big asset to us. So that's a good point. I just wanted to highlight that.
Everything.
Learn everything.
Just know everything. With the understanding that we don't all know everything, how do you kind of, I suppose, working between a bunch of different roles or going from project to project, what's the process like of adapting to kind of new workflows, new technologies or new processes on a new project or with a new composer?
Yeah, so with Simon, I had to learn how to use Studio One, because that's the DAW that Simon uses. I'd been using Logic up until... I'd been using Logic up until that point. And I wouldn't say that it was there's a quote I think it's from Hans Zimmer again, the best door is the one you know. And all doors are pretty much the same. Like, they're very similar. So if you know one, it's pretty easy to learn another. There were definitely still learning curves. But you can definitely, if you see a listing and they say you need to know Cubase, and you don't know Cubase, you can still easily come in and say, I'm a master in this, or maybe don't say master, but I'm an expert in this DAW, and I've easily adapted to other things, I guess that's how I would put it in. Sorry, I already warned Jini I was going to get waffly, and it's happened many times.
You're crashing it. You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So yes, Studio One. So it wasn't too steep of a learning curve, I would say. There definitely are parts that I'm like, oh, this is something I've never dealt with before.
Were you in Dorico as well?
Yeah, I was already in Dorico, so that was lucky. So the two main things were Studio One at Dorico. There was at one point going to be Pro Tools. That didn't end up happening, luckily. I'm glad. So I think, to answer your question more generally, I think the thing about this career is you end up becoming pretty adept with computers, and it becomes less and less difficult to switch between things. You end up with this whole catalogue of programs that you maybe don't remember how to use now, but you used 10 years ago, and you end up with this whole big list of things you can say, yes, I have worked in that. And it's at the point that you have a list that big, I don't think people are going to doubt you that you could learn a new one. You know what I mean?
And you can lie a little.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Just say what
You'll be
it
fine.
is.
You'll be fine. YouTube exists,
Got a few more audience questions. I think we talked a little bit about key skills. Actually, maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. We've talked about kind of non-technical skills, professional presentation, kind of managing your brand, I suppose. But what are the other sort of maybe more technical skills that you would be looking for in a composer's assistant?
Yeah, it'll depend on the role, like in what role you want them to fulfill. I think the more you can do, the better, always. But I think we've covered most of you might do some MIDI editing, some score prep or orchestration. You might be doing some writing. Have we not? Is there anything basically anything? Like I said before, anything you can think of that might happen within the scope of a game could be a skill, and that you could potentially be assisting on. And don't underestimate how quickly people might need help on something, because it can get pretty full on with especially if they're going to be integrating the music as well. Have we? Yeah.
When you were you're right that the more you know, the better. But when you were advertising, what were the things that you were it's a deal breaker if you don't?
Yeah, definitely theory, music theory, and score prep, because you had to be able to write, do the score prep. That was a big one for me because I know people. I think music theory is just really good to know just for yourself, for your. But it opens up so many doors for you to help with orchestration or writing or anything like that. But yeah, the theory was theory, and then subsequently orchestration was the deal breaker. You had to. That was a requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah. The rest, because things like Studio One, you can learn pretty easily, like you said. File organization, that's easy and can be taught, but you can't really just teach someone how to orchestrate or whatever. As part of a job. I
asked, because I knew that music theory was going to come up, it really is very important, particularly notation knowledge. It really is very important. So I was asking other composers if they had any recommendations for where to find music theory, lessons online. I didn't get a heap of responses, but I do know that I think YouTube is, I know that's a very basic answer, but if you are not feeling very strong with your theory or your notation, because it's not too uncommon for a composer not to actually have the formal education. Go to YouTube, particularly notation, like search like music notation lessons, and probably the important theory lessons are going to come with it. That's just a tip that if you're kind of freaking out right now, like, oh, okay, I don't really know theory, you can learn, it's fine, yeah.
You mentioned game dev skills before as kind of like a broad umbrella term. Imagine someone comes from has never worked in, you're talking to a composer or an assistant composer who's never worked in games before, who wants to get in. What are the first kind of 1 or 2 things he'd be like, these are useful technical skills that are game specific?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I thought, yeah.
Someone coming from not from...
I mean, I came from not games.
Yeah.
This was my first games gig, so.
I mean, a lot of the skills don't necessarily require like knowledge of in-depth of game dev and like, you know.
As a bonus.
Yeah. I mean, it's always good to know, but like, you know, for instance, like if you were orchestrating or anything like that, or score prep, that's not really, you don't need to know the ins and outs of game development or anything like that. Obviously, if you were helping someone integrate, you'd need to know, you know, how middleware works or how Unity or Unreal or whatever works. But, you know, by then you wouldn't be coming from outside that space. So probably not, like, it's not overly necessary, but, you know, it's always nice to, like, be working with another gamer or something, you know, always.
I think a lot of the time it just makes conversation easier. 'Cause, like, I don't mean that in, like, more pleasant. I just mean, like, you don't have to stop and, you don't have to stop and translate things as you go. But...
Yeah, I guess if we were like talking about like, oh, we're doing in the style of this game composer or look, I suppose that might help. But
yeah.
But in terms of like the technical skills, wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Did that answer the question?
I think that answers the question.
Okay. Good.
Got a few more audience questions here that I'm just sorting through. Sorry, I keep looking at my phone. It's not because I'm like, I've got better things to do than this, guys. Just going through your excellent questions. You mentioned here having bad time on a very big forum on the internet, looking for work. But we have questions here about good places to find this kind of work, or kind of common ones, particularly in Australia.
Yeah. Forums are actually not a bad place. They're just not the most direct place. You will see opportunities come up. I mean, and that's actually how I got my first gig as a composer. I was part of a lot of film forums, filmmaking forums, and somebody did a call out generally for crew, and then I pitched for it. And so anyway, forums are not the worst place. They're just, it's the internet. The internet's bonkers. So like, there are good and bad things that come with it. In terms of in-person, these kind of gigs are great. It's keep in mind that it can be a slow burn. I'm not saying that you will find someone here and they'll be like, yes, I need an assistant, let's work in a few weeks. It's about, I forgot who said this, but the general goal with networking, particularly in this industry, is to make friends. Make friends, you know, keep in touch, and this industry, particularly in audio, is really embracing. Like there's a lot of support, and people are going to try and get you work on your behalf. Like, so it's hard, again, social anxiety, but make friends here. Woo, friends! Make friends here. Because that's kind of how I got both of my job friends.
Yeah, I don't know what forum it was on. I scrolled past and someone asked if they should go to this audio event to like network to get work, and there was someone that posted, and I'm sure they were well-meaning, and they were like, no, like don't go there. That's where your like competitors are and stuff. And I didn't really. I was like that's not good advice at all, because
I just feel like competitors. It's just a stupid concept.
It's a crappy mindset anyway. But like I say, I think I've been saying the whole time is like you have no like the smallest conversation that you have with someone could lead to something huge, 5 years down the line, which is what happened with me. Chris, at the time, this man called Chris just messaged me out of the blue, and because he liked my music, and he was like, oh man, asking me questions, and I was like, just had a chat with him, told him how I work and stuff, and that was it. didn't hear from him for 5 years. And then I posted on, I think, IGDA Sydney or something. And then he messaged me again. He's like, hey man, like, I'm working for this game company. Like, do you want to do music? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, just because he knew me from, 5 years ago. And so, these sorts of sort of chance encounters will come from any angle. And I think, I don't like the word network, but I think like making friends. You'll make friends and things will come up and they'll lead to all sorts of opportunities.
That's something I think applies in the arts in general. Is people think of networking as like, I think people mistakenly think of networking as like you pinpoint the most influential person in the room and you try and like make an impression on them. But actually the truth is like in a room full of your peers, if you look after your people, they'll look after you. And like it's kind of, it's every opportunity I think I've ever gotten has been from somebody who was coming up at the same time as me, or maybe a couple of years ahead, but not very much more than that, who was like, oh, I thought of you for something, or like I just threw your name like to this person. It's not one big break that you're going to get. It's a lot of people looking after each other. It's kind of how it goes.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was looking for an assistant at that point, I didn't really know anyone else that I could.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I just had a thought and then it came out on my face before. Continue talking.
I can't remember what I was saying.
I was going to jump straight in and then I realised I was interrupting you. So please continue and then I'll say my words.
I was saying something probably really profound. I didn't really know anyone that would be able to fulfill the role at that point, I don't think. Either I knew them and I didn't know that they could, or I just didn't know. But now it's at the point where, if I did need another assistant, then I sort of have people that I know that I would just reach out to and see if they were interested. And for me, a lot of it is because, like I was saying at the start, it's like that unknown factor. When you're looking to work with someone, there's all these question marks and it's scary and it's like, and it's also like I want to work with my friends, and so that's another really sort of powerful thing to think about. And it might come across as like, oh, it's who you know or whatever, that old moniker, but
it kind of is though.
It is. I don't think it's a very negative thing though. It's.
I didn't mean it. Sorry. Again, I find it so hard not to interrupt. No. I didn't mean that in the sense it's like you need to know the most powerful people. It's just like generally your gigs come from people that you've connected with in the past. The big face moment, it was because I was trying to think of how I got the jobs and then I remembered and anyway.
How'd you...
Apply for mentorships. There are a lot that come up. One in particular that I got was the APRA AMCOS mentorship for women in film and games. And that was a big change because I think a mentorship, it's really easy to be like, I've seen your process now. Can you, and you kind of, on a more superficial level, you get to prove yourself to them in that moment. It's kind of like an audition for however many weeks you're doing it,
Knowing if someone can do the job is so powerful in choosing.
Absolutely.
Because, during the hiring process, I was like, is this person going to ruin me? Like, are they going to completely take up all my time and do the opposite?
Nobody wants to go through the hiring process, either side. Nobody wants to do it. So if a composer knows someone they can do the job, they're much more likely to reach out to them than go through the whole process.
Yeah.
Because as we were saying earlier, the skills of putting together a compelling application are different from the skills of assistant composing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which can be a dangerous thing.
Yes, it can. Yeah.
I reckon we have time for a couple more audience questions.
What?
What's that? You're like, get me out of here.
I was waiting for a timer. I'm just curious how long we've gone for.
We've got 15 minutes to go.
Oh,
how's that sitting with you?
Oh, that's good. It's good. Let's go.
Actually, one more note on networking. I know networking can be a bit of a cursed term, but thinking of it as rather than a network in a kind of horrible web way, think of it as a safety net, I think is kind of a nice way to do it. As we said, like,
Yeah.
every relationship, professional or otherwise, is also a human relationship.
Yeah.
Got to figure out
Yeah, exactly.
whether you can work with someone as a person before you're working with them
Yeah.
in another role.
I think
That's
that's
it.
a nice way to
Yeah.
look at it for sure.
I mean-
Because, sorry.
No.
Even if all you get out of the relationship is like a, congrats, you did it, it's still really nice. Like, it's still really nice to have those people that know what you had to go through to get there. You know, it's a nice, you feel more encouraged going, even if that's all you get out of a relationship, it's worth it, you know.
And also an important way to, despite the dubious nature of whisper networks, also a good way to avoid exploitation.
Yeah,
Two words in
yeah,
one. Chat to people. Question from Ben. Simon, you've
Yes.
worked as a composer both with and without an assistant.
Mm.
How did having an assistant change the way that you work?
I mean, no, well, the scope of what we were doing on God's Unchained was way different to, I think, maybe the fact that I knew that I had an assistant, maybe that sort of gave me the confidence to, you know, go for what we were achieving. But it's nice to sort of pass off a few tasks, but the whole process doesn't really change much. You still sort of are considering, it's just like, you'll get to a point where you can be like, okay, this is good for Nat, like I can throw that off to her now. But the actual process doesn't really change much. You still obviously need to lead. I mean, unless, you know, they were taking a more considerable chunk of the role, it's almost like you just have a clone all of a sudden that appears and we'll just start working on something over there. But yeah, the actual process is pretty similar.
Did you get to compose more, like, as a result, like, in terms of your whole day-to-day?
No. No, I mean, there was just, I mean, like the role, an assistant was required because there was a lot of logistics in the role. Whereas, you know, for something like Vactix, it's just purely composing in the box, no, you know, purely electronic. So it's hard to compare the two experiences. I'm sure that if I had to do everything that you were doing by myself, it would take much longer. Yeah, but yeah.
Because I ask because I guess ultimately that's the point. Composers usually ask for assistance because they want to focus on writing and they're doing too much administrative crap. So
Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate goal.
that's the goal.
And Nat, you sort of worked in both roles, right? Like as a composer and as an assistant composer. And I remember you saying that you'd kind of moved pretty intentionally towards assistant composing for a while. I wonder if you could speak through the pros and cons of working in either or both.
So I work in both at the moment. It was semi-intentional. Like I had been looking for work, but it wasn't like I was actively putting off composing. A lot of the time people become assistant composers to kind of level up to a new network of clients, I guess. And that wasn't necessarily the case for me. What was the question? Sorry, I just...
The benefits or specificities of working as a composer versus an assistant composer.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay, cool. So one of the things I enjoy about being an assistant specifically is it does take a little bit less brain power. Sometimes that's not true, but like in terms of the music already being written, you know that moment when you're staring at your door and it's empty, or you have that little bit of crappy music and you're like, I'm never going to finish this. That's not something that happens with this. It is, you kind of get to relax your brain a little bit. Like there is a lot of thinking, kind of problem solving to it. But you can watch TV while you do this. You can listen to music that you've wanted to listen to, because that is, I know the biggest complaint of a lot of composers is that they can't listen to music while they do their work because it is music.
You try.
Yeah, you try, but it's like, oh. Yeah, so honestly, like, actually having like a really clear task, a really clear idea of what's going to happen next, was really helpful for me, because often with composing it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Definitely pro for composing is it's more creative. And assisting can get pretty tedious, just like any assistant job would. You will do, like with MIDI transcribing and orchestration, you will do the same thing over and over and over again, and you have to be ready to do that. While composing is a lot of variety, a lot of creativity. Assisting is basically if you took composing and just made it a little bit more mathematical. You know what I mean? Like, so if you like that, you know, if you don't do it. Don't do it. Why are you here?
Great. Great advice. Get out of here. I cut you off earlier when you were talking about an average day with Kevin versus an average day with Simon, and I wondered, because you did say that they were very, very different, if you could kind of go into a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, sure. The only reason I was bringing it up then was more to point out that this gig was a long-term gig, and the day-to-day looks very different. So I guess a day-to-day with the stuff with Kevin, it's bonkers. It's bonkers busy, like for Kevin more than me, and I'm guessing for a lot of composers. This may just be the project itself, but it is so demanding and so fast-paced. Like, I was okay, because Kevin had to deal with the most of it. But yeah, it was a very, very different scenario, because, yeah, I think the fact that it is short-term and usually deadlines are very pressed, and there's a lot of music. Like, there was sometimes Kevin would have like 40 tracks to do in like 2 weeks. And he did it somehow, because he always does, but it's pretty damn taxing. So it looked pretty similar for me, because with his last project, I did orchestrate most of his tracks. And so basically you were working for as much as the day as you felt prepared to. Like, again, you know how I was talking about exploitation before and the number of hours you worked. I was lucky with Kevin that if I said I'm done for the day, he'd be like, yep, go. You know, don't do anymore. I guess there's probably a danger of that not being an option with other composers. But yeah, so it was just so different. You're basically, as long as you're happy to work, you have something to do right now and it needs to be done ASAP, you know. But because this is was a long-term project, live service, a lot of the things we did... Yeah, that's true, games in general. There was a lot more kind of doing things to invest in the future a little bit, like in terms of getting musicians all together and that kind of thing. It was much more... Yeah, you're right. I would say games is probably a much less stressful environment than film and TV, particularly TV. Oh my God, yeah, like TV is a whole another world, which is what I've been doing with Kevin, which is why it's bonkers. I keep wanting to ask, did that answer the question? I'm going to let you just...
I have to say, I've been interviewing like game devs and people working in games for a very long time, and this is the first time I've ever heard someone who is working in games say that another field is even worse.
Oh.
So,
I know there was sorry, this is a little tangential, but I feel like it's necessary. There was a question this morning about moving to Japan and working there. What I will say, purely from my experience with Kevin, it is crazy. It is so demanding. So if you're going to do that, be prepared. Think about what your capacity is. I think in general, being an assistant, in general, you need to decide what your capacity is and go in with that. I think it's a mix between being anime, maybe a little bit of lack of organisation from that specific company. But particularly, it seems to be Japanese media has very tight, short, strict deadlines, but also TV does in general. So if you want to move to Japan to work, by all means do it. Just know that it could be pretty overwhelming. That is from like the 4 projects I've done with Kevin though, so maybe I don't have a big enough scope to actually give you that advice.
Pretty standard for TV. Like,
Yeah, true.
All the games,
TV
like when I was working on Vactix, I was like, oh, how much more time do we have? He's like, oh, no, maybe 2 more months. We've got 2 more months, that's fine.
Yeah,
Like,
I think for musicians in particular, probably not sound designers, but musicians, games is kind of like a breeze compared to other...
Unless you get brought on right at the last second.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
usually the game devs will find a reason to delay the game for another 6 months. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I've just been really lucky, but I've always had
that's
all the
what
time
I'm worried about.
I ever wanted to, which is good and bad, because you kind of expand. Like you're like, I've got this much time, I can work on it for like this much time. Then instead of like getting it done and being free, you kind of
Is it how typical is it to have an assistant role in a kind of game dev composition project?
In Australia, not very at all.
common, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because there's a question here about whether or not that was something you had to advocate for, or if the role was kind of already existed to be hired into.
So my boss, then boss, was very keen on expanding the team, and then a composer assistant was part of that. So it really just depends on the people that are running the company and the budget and things like that. But I think I have been seeing game soundtracks. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it's very often that you see more than one composer on any given soundtrack getting released, and then you've got them, and then they might have assistants and orchestrators and all of that. There's like so much work there that I think, and I could be wrong, but I feel like it's growing as a viable field, not just being a solo composer, but just helping or assisting in whatever capacity you have.
Yeah, I was going to say, right now it's not common, but I think part of the reason we're doing the talk is that I do think it's going to expand in the next, particularly in Australia, particularly in games, because it seems like a lot more funding is being channeled to games instead of film and TV. And this is just a theory, but like there have been theories that film and TV is kind of going to take a little bit of a nosedive, in the next 10 years, and games will be what's really kind of continuing. And honestly, this is a pretty grim way to look at it, but composers just keep getting more and more overwhelmed, and eventually they reach the point where they're like, I have to have help, or I'm going to break down. So
like every bigger composer that I talk to, they all have assistants. And you can help someone from across the world. Like your options are worldwide.
So I'd say
as well
that's
as here, obviously.
Oh, I really want to get into assisting remotely now, but that feels like a whole topic, and we have exactly 1 minute left on this panel.
Oh shit.
Go on. Do you want? Quick! I've done all my assisting remotely, because Simon used to live in Adelaide, and so I was here, he was in Adelaide.
I love that you started this panel being like, I'm so shy. You've just been talking shit up here the whole time. Okay, assisting remotely.
Do you want, what specifically do you want? Do you want the practical, because it's all I know about assisting. It's always been remote. So usually it's a lot of chatting on Facebook, a lot of chatting on Discord, shared Dropboxes and stuff. Actually, that's one of the big benefits to the field. For me, you're pretty much always working from home, which was very important to me at the time.
And like hitting your own hours and stuff as well. Like
that was also very, part of what made me look for this job, I'm going to say this really quickly, I was getting chronic migraines at the time, so I couldn't actually do a 9 to 5 because I was too unreliable. So to have a job that I could do from home and choose the hours I work was like, that's what I really wanted, because I could actually be reliable for the person. And so that was a big thing for me. So assisting, it probably will be remote. honestly, unless
Yeah,
it's big company
There's not
or
much,
something.
unless you had to attend a session or something like that. There's not much that you can't do.
Even
Or-
then, I always attended the sessions online. Yeah.
Or if they had like a clone of their computer and you had to use the same samples or something like that. But
Yeah, that's true.
there's-
Sorry, that was mine.
Is that time
Actually,
up?
great timing because it is time.
Oh, wow.
Can we just have a big hand?